it's raining outside, so ouch. Ooga booga. Switched over to this version. Okay. Stop on you something. I'm going to hit the ads real quick. Just say that's not gonna let me. Oh, my pre-roll was off, so I guess the ads already ran. Cool, cool. So, how is life in the rest of the stream world? Where am I looking for here? Yeah. If you notice down in my links, there's a few new ones. Dealing. Get notifications. Why do I have that stupid seagull song in my head? So I was listening to it today, that's why. Anyway, if you look down in my panels and the links, there's a couple of new additions in it. I have the link to the Grey Wolf Rare and Magical, you know, this wonderful shop. I have my a link to my author page on blurb.com, which is where you can buy my book at the moment. Pretty cool. There's two versions of it on there. I would suggest you get the $10 one. Just because, well, it's cheaper. um, usually it takes a couple of weeks for them to get this shipped out, so I went ahead and made that go live. I am still trying to get the permission to use the Storyteller artwork that I've used since I started streaming for my cover. But I'm halfway there. Well, a little over halfway there now because I'm at $80 and I need another 70. And if you donate to that, I'm going to put your name in the book and special thanks in the last pages of it, which that's cool and all. And I mentioned it on the coffee page, but pull it up. If you donate, I will put your name in there, and I am tempted to give away a couple of copies of my proofs. I mean, if you guys would want that, I'm not sure if you'd really want like a signed copy of the book that Amazon should have put out, or let's say that Amazon should have put out, except they refused vehemently because they couldn't prove that century-old stories were out of copyright. But I currently have a copyright. Well, I filed for one, and I didn't realize it was $45 to get the official U.S. copyright on it. But what the hey? It's in the books now. If I get any more published works, I will go ahead and try to put them in for copyright as well. But I think it's kind of cool that I've done this, and if nothing else, my name's on record, which has been one of my life goals. So there's that. Now, why did a post made by me come up as listing mentioning me? Or is it just because my name's there? I mean, my name's in the link, so I guess that's why. But anyway, that's my coffee page. And again, that's if you want to donate to my coffee and help me get the commercial rights from my picture. I kind of want to make bookmarks too, but that's another subject entirely. If I could get the money, I'd even have book plates made. which I've kind of been, loosely talking to the person who'd be making them, but I don't have the money to do it yet. But I also have the address for the book sale. That's my author page on Blurb. So that's also really cool. But again, I'm just plugging myself here tonight. I don't expect anyone to do anything. Can't really think of any reason people would want to other than just to support me. What's funny is I also have my book listed on my Throne store, which I thought was hilarious. So if you go to my Throne, it's one of the books listed, and some of the other books are also from the bookshop.org. But if you get them, that's entirely up to you. It'd be cool and all, but not exactly requiring anyone to do anything. Oh, that's what it's doing. My alerts aren't muted on my on my stream manager, but they are everywhere else. Also says that one viewer who is watching me. I always feel like somebody's watching me. Gotta get no privacy. Ooh, oh. Okay. But yeah, I'm trying to get stuff done. Honestly, it'd just be really cool to. I mean, I'm not making money on streaming, clearly. I'm still waiting with somewhat bated breath. I think I need 10 more streams before I can get the free emotes, and then I'll transfer the sub emotes over to that one if it allows me any. But yeah, it'd be really nice to have it happen. So, welcome in everyone. I usually have, well, it looks like about 2 more minutes before I get into the actual reading. So, if anyone wants to say anything, thoughts, questions, scare the life out of me using my own sound effects, which hopefully are working. I guess I'll test just to make sure. The sound alerts has been kind of a pain. If I'm hearing it, hopefully you're hearing it. If you're not hearing it, let me know. Because sound alerts has been just a royal pain in my tail. But yeah, I'm definitely hearing it. And I have my audio turned off, so I'm not. I'm hearing it through the OBS. I'm not sure if. What is a Motham? Let's catch it anyway. Okay, catch. Ultrambolo. Oof. I don't know. Can you guys hear the thunder outside? Can you hear me? I'm not seeing anything registering on the microphone for the thunder, so maybe you're not hearing it. I don't know. Not showing up on the mic meter anyway. So doesn't even hear it? Inquiring minds need to know. But I need to this other channel so I can tab. Okay, there we go. I don't need to hear my own alerts echoing in my head. I'm sure you don't want to hear my alerts either. But let's see, it is 9:10. The thunder be rolling outside. If I mysteriously vanish, oh cool, I got it. But if I mysteriously vanish, it's because of the thunderstorm. But I want to get through as much of Sherlock Holmes as I can. I only have 4 chapters of it left for a study in Scarlet. So leave us go to my study, and we will see what we can get through. Because it is time to settle in. Let's see, a little bit more. I look like I need to fix my hat. So, there we go. Much better. Now I can see everyone. But yeah. Okay, I've got my chat window open so I can watch to see what's going on. Trying to go to another one so I can see any alerts that come up. Screen bigger and not so much my quick actions. Basics has been updated. And of course, people are sending me reels on the Twitters, not the Twitters, the Instas. Because everyone likes Insta. Thinking of audio, let me check. Is my background audio running? It is indeed. Okay. Can you hear my wonderful fireplace? Since I can't really test levels because I'm muting myself so I don't hear it. Oh. Yeah. But anyway, let's get into the book, shall we? And yeah. If anything else, I'll hear the sound alerts if you play them. They shouldn't show up on the VOD because hopefully I have the settings right. But let's get into this wonderful book by the pre-knighted Arthur Conan Doyle. Actually, let me run the ads real quick to make sure nothing happens. Because I don't want anyone to miss any of the story. So let's switch to this and play the ads. Like so. Okay, that'll give us a little over another hour without an interruption, so I just want you guys to not miss any of the story, honestly. class is actually over. Look at just over for one line. Pretty lightning. Okay. So I'm going to guess that the ads are over, so let's try this again. We are reading a study in Scarlet, and we are on Chapter 4, A Flight for Life. On the morning which followed his interview with the Mormon prophet, John Ferrier went into Salt Lake City, and having found his acquaintance, who was bound for the Nevada mountains, he entrusted him with his message to Jefferson Hope. In it he told the young man of the imminent danger which threatened them, and how necessary it was that he should return. Having done thus, he felt easier in his mind, and returned home with a lighter heart. As he approached his farm, he was surprised to see a horse hitched to each of the posts of his gate. Still more surprised was he, on entering, to find two young men in possession of his sitting room. One, with a long, pale face, was leaning back in the rocking chair, with his feet cocked up on the stove. The other, a bull-necked youth with coarse, bloated features, was standing in front of the window, with his hands in his pockets, whistling a popular hymn. Both of them nodded to Ferrier as he entered, and the one on the rocking chair commenced the conversation. "Maybe you don't know us," he said. "This here's the son of Elder Drebber, and I'm Joseph Stragerson, who traveled with you in the desert when the Lord stretched out his hand and gathered you into the true fold. As he will all the nations in his own good time," said the other in a nasal voice. "He grindeth slowly but exceedingly small." John Ferrier bowed coldly. He had guessed who his visitors were. "We have come," continued Stagerson, "at the advice of our fathers, to solicit the hand of your daughter for whichever of us may seem good to you and to her. As I have 4 wives and Brother Drebber here has 7, it appears to me that my claim is the stronger one." "Nay, nay, Brother Stagerson," cried the other. "The question is not how many wives we have, but how many we can keep. My father has now given over his mills to me, and I am the richer man." "But my prospects are better," said the other one warmly. "When the Lord removes my father, I shall have his tanning yard and his leather factory. Then I am your elder, and am higher in the church." "It will be for the maiden to decide," rejoined young Drebber, smirking at his own reflection in the glass. "We will leave it all to her decision." During this dialogue, John Ferrier had stood fuming in the doorway, hardly able to keep his riding whip in the backs of his two visitors. "Look here," he said at last, striding up to them. "When my daughter summons you, you can come. But until then, I don't want to see your faces again." Two young Mormons stared at him in amazement. In their eyes, this competition between them for the maiden's hand was the highest of honors both to her and her father. "There are 2 ways out of the room," cried Ferrier. "There is a door, and there is a window. Which do you care to use?" His brown face looked so savage, and his gaunt hands so threatening, that his visitors sprang to their feet and beat a hurried retreat. The old farmer followed them to the door. "Let me know when you have settled on which it is to be," he said sardonically. "You shall smart for this," Stangerson cried, white with rage. "You have defied the prophet and the council of 4. You shall rue it to the end of your days." "The hand of the Lord shall be heavy upon you," cried young Drebber. "He will arise and smite you." "Then I'll start the smiting," exclaimed Ferrier furiously, and would have rushed upstairs for his gun had not Lucy seized him by the arm and restrained him. Before he could escape from her, the clatter of horses' hooves told him that they were both beyond his reach. "The young canting rascals!" he exclaimed, whipping the perspiration from his forehead. "I would sooner see you in your grave, my girl, than the wife of either of them."
"And so should I, father," she answered with spirit. "But Jefferson will soon be here."
"Yes, it will not be long before he comes. The sooner the better, for we do not know what their next move may be." It was indeed high time that someone capable of giving advice and help should come to the aid of the sturdy old farmer and his adopted daughter. And the whole history of the settlement there had never been such a case of rank disobedience to the authorities of the elders. If minor errors were punished so sternly, what would be the fate of this arch rebel? Ferrier knew that his wealth and position would be of no avail to him. Others are well known, and as rich as himself have been spirited away before now, and their goods given over to the church. He was a brave man, but he trembled at the vague, shadowy terrors which hung over him. Any known danger he could face with a firm lip, but the suspense was unnerving. He concealed his fears from his daughter, however, and affected to make light of the whole matter, though she, with the keen eye of love, saw plainly that he was ill at ease. He expected that he would receive some message or remonstrance from Young as to his conduct, and he was not mistaken, though it came in an unlooked-for manner. Upon rising the next morning he found, to his surprise, a small square of paper pinned on the coverlet of his bed just over his chest. On it was printed in bold, straggling letters, "29 days are given you for amendment, and then—" The dash was more fear-inspiring than any threat could have been. How this warning came into his room puzzled John Ferrier sorely, for his servants slept in the outhouse, and the doors and windows had all been secured. He crumpled the paper up and said nothing to his daughter, but the incident struck a chill into his heart. 29 days were evidently the balance of the month which Young had promised. What strength or courage could avail against an enemy armed with such mysterious powers? The hand was fastened to the pen have struck him to the heart, and he could never have known who had slain him. Still more shaken was he the next morning. They had sat down to their breakfast when Lucy, with a cry of surprise, pointed upwards. In the center of the ceiling was scrawled, with a burned stick apparently, the number 28. To his daughter it was unintelligible, and he did not enlighten her. That night he sat up with his gun and kept watch on the ward. He saw and heard nothing, and yet in the morning a great 27 had been painted upon the outside of his door. Thus day followed day, and as sure as morning came he found that his unseen enemies had kept their register, and had marked in some conspicuous position how many days were still left to him out of the month of grace. Sometimes the fatal numbers appeared on the walls, sometimes upon the floors. Occasionally they were on small placards stuck upon the garden gate or the railings. With all his vigilance, John Ferrier could not discover whence these daily warnings proceeded. A horror which was almost superstitious came upon him at the sight of them. He became haggard and restless, and his eyes had the troubled look of some hunted creature. He had but one hope in life now, and that was for the arrival of the young hunter from Nevada. 20 had changed to 15, and 15 to 10, but there was no news of the absentee. One by one the numbers dwindled down, and still there came no sign of him. Whenever a horseman clattered down the road, or a driver shouted at his team, the old farmer hurried to the gate, thinking that help had arrived at last. At last, when he saw 5 give way to 4, and that again to 3, he lost heart and abandoned all hope of escape. Single-handed, and with his limited knowledge of the mountains which surrounded the settlement, he knew that he was powerless. The more frequented roads were strictly watched and guarded, and none could pass along them without order from the council. Turn which way he would, there appeared to be no avoiding the blow which hung over him. Yet the old man never wavered in his resolution to part with his life before he consented to what he regarded as his daughter's dishonor. He was sitting alone one evening, pondering deeply over his troubles and searching vainly for some way out of them. That morning had flown the figure 2 upon the wall of his house, and the next day would be the last he allotted time. What was to happen then? All manner of vague and terrible fancies filled his imagination. And his daughter, what was to become of her after he was gone? There was no escape from the invisible network which was drawn all around them. He sank his head upon the table and sobbed at the thought of his own impotence. What was that? In the silence he heard a gentle scratching sound, low, but very distinctly in the quiet of the night. It came from the door of the house. Ferrier crept into the hall and listened intently. There was a pause for a few moments, and then a low, insidious sound was repeated. Someone was evidently tapping very gently upon one of the panels of the door. Was it some midnight assassin who had come to carry out the murderous orders of the secret tribunal? Or was it some agent who was marking up the last day of the grace had arrived? John Ferrier felt that instant death would be better than the suspense which shook his nerves and chilled his heart. Springing forward, he drew the bolt and threw the door open. Outside, all was calm and quiet. The night was fine, and the stars were twinkling brightly overhead. The little front garden lay before the farmer's eyes, bounded by the fence and gate, but neither there nor on the road was any human being to be seen. With a sigh of relief, Ferrier looked right and to left until, happening to glance straight down at his own feet, he saw to his astonishment a man lying flat down upon his face on the ground, his arms and legs all sprawled. So unnerved was he at the sight that he leaned up against the wall with his hand to his throat to stifle his inclination to call out. His first thought was that the prostrate figure was that of some wounded or dying man. But as he watched it, he saw it writhe along the ground and into the hall with the rapidity and noiselessness of a serpent. Once within the house, the man sprang to his feet, closed the door, and revealed to the astonished farmer the fierce face and resolute expression of Jefferson Hope. "Good God!" gasped John Ferrier. "How you scared me! Whatever made you come in like that?" "Give me food," the other said hoarsely. "I've had no bites except for 84 hours. He flung himself on the cold meat and bread which were still lying upon the table of his host's supper, and devoured it voraciously. "Does Lucy bear up well?" he asked, when he had satisfied his hunger. "Yes, she does not know the danger," the father answered. "Well, that is well. The house is watched on every side. That is why I crawled up the way I did. They may be damn sharp, but they're not quite sharp enough to watch a Washoe hunter." John Ferrier felt a different man now that he realized that he had a devoted ally. He seized the young man's leathery hand and wrung it cordially. "You're a man to be proud of," he said. "There are not many who would come to share our danger and our troubles." "You've hit it there, pard," the young hunter answered. "I have respect for you, but if you were alone in this business, I'd think twice before I put my head into such a hornet's nest. It's Lucy that brings me here, and before harm comes on her, I guess there will be one less of the Hope family in Utah. What are we to do?" "Tomorrow is your last day. Unless you act tonight, you are lost. I have a mule and 2 horses waiting in the Eagle Ravine. How much money have you?" $2,000 in gold and 5 in notes." "That'll do. I have as much more to add to it. You must push for Carson City through the mountains. You'd best wake Lucy. It is well that the servants do not sleep in the house." While Ferrier was absent in preparing his daughter for the approaching journey, Jefferson Hope packed all the eatables that he could find into a small parcel, and filled a stoneware jar with water, for he knew by experience that the mountain wells were few and far between. He had hardly completed his arrangements before the farmer returned with his daughter all dressed and ready for his start. The greeting between the lovers was warm but brief. For moments they were precious, and there was much to be done. "We must make our start at once," said Jefferson Hope, speaking in a low but resolute voice, like one who realizes the greatness of the peril, but has steeled his heart to meet it. "The front and back entrances are watched, but with caution we may get away through the side window and across the fields. Once on the road, we are only 2 miles from the ravine where the horses are waiting. By daybreak, we should have halfway through the mountains." "What if we are stopped?" asked Ferrier. Hope slapped a revolver butt which protruded from his tunic. "There are too many of us. We shall take 2 or 3 of them with us," he said with a sinister smile. The lights inside the house had all been extinguished, and from a darkened window Ferrier peered over the fields which had been his own, and which he now was about to abandon forever. He had long nerved himself to the sacrifice, however, and the thought of honor of happiness of his daughter outweighed any regret at his ruined fortunes. He looked so peaceful and happy, all the rustling trees and the broad, silent stretch of grain land, but it was difficult to realize that the spirit of murder lurked through it all. Yet the white face and the set of expression of the young hunter showed that in his approach to the house he had seen enough to satisfy him upon that head. Ferrier carried along a bag of gold notes. Jefferson Hope had scanty provisions and water, while Lucy had a small bundle containing a few or more of her valued possessions. Opening the window very slowly and carefully, they waited until a dark cloud had somewhat obscured the night, and then one by one passed through into the little garden. With bated breath and crouching figures stumbled across it and gained the shelter of the hedge, which they skirted until they came to the gap which opened to the cornfield. They had just reached this point when the young man seized the 2 companions and dragged them down into the shadow, where they lay silent and trembling. It was all well that this prairie training had given Jefferson Hope the ears of a lynx. He and his friends had harshly crouched down before the melancholy hooting of the mountain owl was heard within a few yards of them, which was immediately answered by another hoot at a small distance. At the same moment a vague, shadowy figure emerged from the gap from which they had been making and uttered the plaintive signal cry again, in which a second man appeared out of the obscurity. "Tomorrow at midnight," said the first, who appeared to be the authority, "when the whippoorwill calls 3 times." "It is well," returned the other. "I shall tell Brother Trevor." "Pass it on to him, and from him to the others, 9 to 7. 9 to 5, repeated the other. The 2 figures flitted away in different directions. Their concluding words had evidently been some form of sign or countersign. The instant that their footsteps had died away in the distance, Jefferson Hope sprang to his feet and helped his companions through the gap and led the way across the fields to the top of his speed, supporting and half carrying the girl when her strength appeared to fail her. "Hurry, hurry," he gasped from time to time. "We're through the line of the sentinels. Everything depends on speed. Hurry on." Once on the high road, they made rapid progress. Only once did they meet anyone, and then they managed to slip into a field to avoid recognition. Before reaching the town, the hunter branched away into a rugged and narrow footpath which led to the mountains. 2 dark, jagged peaks loomed above them through the darkness, and the defile which led them was the Eagle Canyon, in which the horses were awaiting them. With unnerving instincts, Jefferson Hope picked his way among the great boulders and along the bed of the dried-up river course, till he came to the retired corner, screened by rocks, where the faithful animals had been picketed. The girl was placed upon the mule, and old Ferrier upon one of the horses, with his money bag, while Jefferson Hope led the other along the precipitous and dangerous path. It was a bewildering route for anyone who is not accustomed to face nature in her wildest moods. On the other side of the great crag towered up 1,000 feet or more, black, stern, and menacing, a long balsamic columns upon its rugged surface like the ribs of some petrified monster. On the other hand, a wild chaos of boulders and debris made all the advance impossible. Between the 2 ran the irregular track, so narrow in places that they had to travel in Indian file, and so rough that the only practiced riders could have traversed it at all. Yet, in spite of all dangers and difficulties, the hearts of the fugitives were light within them, for every step increased the distance between them and the terrible despotism from which they were fleeing. They soon had a proof, however, that they were still within the jurisdiction of the Saints. They had reached the very wildest and most desolate portion of the land when the girl gave a startled cry and pointed upwards. On a rock which overlooked the track, showing out of the dark and plain against the sky, there stood a solitary sentinel. He saw them as soon as they perceived him, and his military challenge, "Who goes there?" rang out in the silent ravine. "Travelers for Nevada," said Jefferson Hope, with his hand upon the rifle which slung by his saddle. They could see the lonely watcher fingering his gun and peering down at them as if dissatisfied at their reply. "By whose permission?" he asked. "The Holy Four," answered Ferrier. His Mormon experiences had taught him that this was the highest authority which he could prefer. "9 to 7, cried the sentinel. 7 to 5, returned Jefferson Hope promptly, remembering the countersign which he had heard in the garden. "Pass, and may the Lord go with you," said the voice from above. Beyond his post, the path broadened out, and the horses were able to break into a trot. Looking back, they could see the solitary soldier watching them, leaning upon his gun, and knew that they had passed the outlying post of the chosen people, and that freedom lay before them. Welcome in, Sammy. Oh, and to stretch an hybrid. Oh. So, can anyone hear the weather outside? Just checking. And why is my model frozen? Okay. That's not good. My model's just staring vacantly into space. That's... not even blinking. That's... oh, there we go. Oh, craziness. Okay. Oh. Get the feeling that Conan Doyle did not like the Mormons. I mean, given the time period, I don't think anything would really like them. Ouch. Okay, just make sure. Can my microphone still be here? Okay, my microphone's still going good. Cool. Does not look like it's picking up the sound from outside. The wind is picking up a little out there. Occasional lightning flashes. Let me switch the Barrett back and I will check the weather alerts real quick. So I will see you in a bit, okay? Dang, did you hear that thunder? Had to make sure my windows were closed again. Okay. The thunderstorms. Yeah, I was checking the weather, right? I was looking out the windows and got distracted. Let's see. Just under thunderstorm warning, tornado warning is gone. Okay, that's fine. I was getting a lot of blowing rain. I did not see any hail, which is, I guess a good sign. But got a flood warning. That'd be really easy since our ground hasn't been soaking up water lately. Let's see, flash flood warning. Yeah, that's nice blowing rain out there. My cat food container for the ferals looked like it was getting soaked, which sucks. What can you do? Oh, the flood warning is going until midnight. Well, isn't that peachy? Flash flood warning goes until midnight. The area flood warning goes until 1:30. Thunderstorm warning only goes until 10. Makes no sense at all. But, yeah, it's just rain. We needed it. We get the ground pummeled to death, but whatever. Okay, let me get back to the book. So we just finished chapter 4 of, chapter 4 of part 2. So, I need to hydrate real quick. Got distracted by looking at water that I forgot to drink any. That's crazy. Okay. And I put a new timer message up. So the pinned message that I had should be rotating out eventually. It was set to every 10 messages or so. And since someone was here, if you check out my links panel down there, my book's listed. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm still needing donations so I can get the commercial release for my Storyteller artwork. I would love to have that on the cover of my book. Book series, because I do plan on trying to do more now that I actually find a place I can have them printed. So, yeah, that'll be fun. Anyway. Hydrated, stretched, because I walked around my entire house. Okay. Chapter 5, The Avenging Angels. All night their course lay through the intricate defiles and over irregular and rock-strewn paths. More than once they lost their way, but Hope's intimate knowledge of the mountains enabled them to regain the track once more. When morning broke, a scene of marvelous, though savage beauty lay before them. In every direction the great snow-capped peaks hemmed them in, peeping over each other's shoulders to the far horizon. So steep were the rocky banks on either side of them that the larch and the pines seemed to be suspended over their heads, and to need only a gust of wind to come hurling down upon them. Nor was the fear entirely an illusion, for the barren valley was thickly strewn with trees and boulders which had fallen in a similar manner. Even as they passed, the great rock came thundering down with a hoarse rattle which woke the echoes in the silent gorges, and startled the very weary horses into a gallop. As the sun rose slowly above the eastern horizon, the caps of the great mountains lit up, one after the other, like lamps at a festival, until they were all ruddy and glowing. The magnificent spectacle cheered the hearts of the three fugitives and gave them fresh energy. At a wild torrent which swept out of the ravine, they called a halt and watered their horses, while they partook in a hasty breakfast. Lucy and her father would fain have rested longer, but Jefferson Hope was inexorable. "They will be upon our track by this time," he said. "Everything depends upon our speed. Once safe in Carson, we may rest for the remainder of our lives." During the whole of that day they struggled on through the defiles, and by evening they calculated that they were more than 30 miles from their enemies. At night time they chose the base of the Beeling Crag, where the rocks offered some protection from the chill wind, and there, huddled together for warmth, they enjoyed a few hours' sleep. Before daybreak, however, they were up and on their way once more. They had seen no sign of any pursuers, and Jefferson Hope began to think that they were fairly out of the reach of the terrible organization whose enmity they had incurred. He little knew how far that iron grasp could reach, or how soon it was to close upon them and crush them. About the middle of the second day of their flight, their scanty store of provisions began to run out. This gave the hunter little uneasiness, however, for there was game to be had among the mountains, and he had frequently before had to depend on his rifle for the needs of life. Choosing a sheltered nook, he piled together a few dried branches and made a blazing fire, at which his companions might warm themselves, for they were now nearly 5,000 feet above the sea level, and the air was bitter and keen. Having tethered the horses and bade Lucy adieu, he threw his gun over his shoulder and set out in search of whatever chance might throw in his way. Looking back, he saw the old man and the young girl crouching over a blazing fire, while the three animals stood motionless in the background. Then the intervening rocks hid them from his view. He walked for a couple of miles through one ravine after another without success, though from the marks upon the barks of the trees and other indications he judged that there were numerous bears in the vicinity. At last, after 2 or 3 hours' fruitless search, he was thinking of turning back in despair, when casting his eyes upward he saw a sign which sent a thrill of pleasure through his heart. On the edge of a jutting pinnacle, 300 or 400 feet above him, there stood a creature somewhat resembling a sheep in appearance, but armed with a pair of gigantic horns. The bighorn, for so it was called, was acting probably as a guardian over a flock which were invisible to the hunter, but fortunately it was heading in the opposite direction and had not perceived him. Lying on his face and resting his rifle upon his rock, he took a long and steady aim before drawing the trigger. The animal sprang into the air and tottered for a moment upon the edge of the precipice, then came crashing down into the valley beneath. The creature was too unwieldy to lift, so the hunter contented himself with cutting away one haunch and a part of the flank. With this trophy over his shoulder, he hastened to retrace his steps, for the evening was already drawing in. He had hardly started, however, before he realized the difficulty which faced him. In his eagerness, he had wandered far past the ravines which were known to him, and it was no easy matter to pick out the path which he had taken. The valley in which he found himself divided and subdivided into many gorges, which were so like each other that it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. He followed one for a mile or more until he came upon a mountain torrent which he was sure he had never seen before. Convinced that he had taken a wrong turn, he tried another, but with the same result. The night was coming rapidly, and it was almost dark before he had at last found himself in a defile which was familiar to him. Even then, it was no easy matter to keep to the right track, for the moon had not yet risen, and the high cliffs on either side made the obscurity more profound. Weighed down with his burden and weary from his exertions, he stumbled along, keeping up his heart by the reflection that every step brought him nearer to Lucy, and that he carried with him enough to ensure them food for the remainder of their journey. He had now come to the mouth of the very defile in which he had left them. Even in the darkness he could recognize the outline of the cliffs that bounded it. They must, he reflected, be awaiting him anxiously, for he had been absent nearly 5 hours. In the gladness of his heart he put his hands in his mouth and made the glen re-echo in a loud "Hello!" as a signal that he was coming. He paused and listened for an answer. None came save for his own cry, which clattered up in the dreary, silent ravines, and was borne back to his ears in countless repetitions. Again he shouted, even louder than before, and again no whisper came back from the friends whom he had left such a short time ago. A vague, nameless dread came over him, and he hurried onwards frantically, dropping the precious food again in his agitation. When he turned the corner, he came full in sight of the spot where the fire had been lit. There was still a glowing pile of wood ashes there, but it had evidently not been tendered since his departure. The same dead silence still reigned all around. With his fears all changed to convictions, he hurried on. There was no living creature near the remains of the fire. Animals, man, maiden, all were gone. It was only too clear that some sudden and terrible disaster had occurred during his absence. Disaster which had embraced them all, and yet left no traces behind it. Bewildered and stunned by this blow, Jefferson Hope felt his head spin around, and he had to lean upon his rifle to save himself from falling. He was essentially a man of action, however, and speedily recovered from his temporary impotence. Seizing a half-consumed piece of wood from the smoldering fire, he blew it into a flame, and proceeded with it to help examine the little camp. The ground was all stamped down by the feet of horses, showing that a large party of mounted men had overtaken the fugitives, and the directions of their tracks proved that they had afterwards turned back to Salt Lake City. He had carried back both of his companions with them. Jefferson Hope had almost persuaded himself that they must have done so when his eye fell upon an object which made every nerve of his body tingle within him. A little way on one side of the camp was the low-lying heap of reddish soil, which had assuredly not been there before. There was no mistaking it for anything but a newly dug grave. As the young hunter approached it, he perceived that a stick had been planted in it, with a sheet of paper stuck in the cleft fork of it. The inscription upon the paper was brief, but to the point. John Ferrier, formerly of Salt Lake City, died August 4th. The sturdy old man whom he had left so short a time ago was gone. Then all this was of the epitaph. Jefferson Hope looked round wildly to see if there was a second grave, but there was no sign of one. Lucy had been carried back to their terrible pursuers to fulfill her original destiny by becoming one of the harem of the elder son. As the young fellow realized the certainty of her fate, and his only powerless to prevent it, he wished that he, too, was lying with the old farmer in his last silence resting place. Again, however, his active spirit shook off the lethargy which springs from despair. If there was nothing else left to do, he could at least devote his life to revenge. With indomitable patience and perseverance, Jefferson Hope possessed also a power of sustained vindictiveness, which he may have learned among the Indians amongst whom he had lived. As he stood by the desolate fire, he felt that only one thing could assuage his grief, would be through the thorough and complete retribution brought by his own hand upon his enemies. His strong will and untiring energy should, he determined, be devoted to that one end. With a grim, white face, he retraced his steps to where he had dropped the food, and having stirred up the smoldering fire, he cooked enough to last him for a few days. Then he made up into the bundle, and as tired as he was, set himself to walk back through the mountains upon the track of the Avenging Angels. For 5 days he toiled footsore and weary through the defiles which he had already traversed on horseback. At night he flung himself down among the rocks and snatched a few hours of sleep, but before daybreak he was always well on his way. On the sixth day he reached the Eagle Canyon, from which they had commenced their ill-fated flight. Thence he could look down upon the home of the saints. Worn and exhausted, he leaned upon his rifle and shook his gaunt hand fiercely at the silent, widespread city beneath him. As he looked at it, he observed that there were flags in some of the principal streets, and others signs of festivity. He was still speculating as to what this might mean, when he heard the clatter of a horse's hoofs and saw a mounted man riding towards him. As he approached, he recognized him as a Mormon named Cowper, to whom he had rendered services at different times. He therefore accosted him when he got up to him, and with the object of finding out what Lucy Ferrier's fate had been. "I'm Jefferson Hope," he said. "You remember me?" The Mormon looked at him with undisguised astonishment. Indeed, it was difficult to recognize in this tattered, unkempt wanderer, with ghastly white face and fierce, wild eyes, the spruce young hunter of former days. Having, however, at last satisfied him to his identity, the man's surprise changed to consternation. "You are mad to come here," he cried. "It is as much as my own life is worth to seen talking to you. There is a warrant against you from the Holy Four for assisting the Ferriers away." "I don't fear them or their warrant," said Hope earnestly. "You must know something about this matter, Cowper. I conjure you by everything you hold dear to answer a few questions. You've always been friends. For God's sake, don't refuse to answer me." "What is it?" the Mormon asked uneasily. "Be quick. The very rocks have ears and the trees eyes." "What has become of Lucy Ferrier?" "She was married yesterday to young Drebber." "Hold up, man, hold up. You have no life left in you." "Don't mind me," said Hope faintly. He was white to the very lips and had sunk down against a stone which he had been leaning. "Married, you say?" "Married yesterday. That's what all those flags are for in an endowment house. There were some strange words between young Drebber and the young Staggerson as to which was to have her. They'd both been in the party that followed them, and Staggerson had shot her father, which seemed to give him the best claim. When they argued it out in the council, Drebber's party was the stronger, so the prophet gave her over to him. No one won't have her very long, though, for I saw death in her face yesterday. She's more like a ghost than a woman. Are you off, then?" "Yes, I'm off," said Jefferson Hope, who had risen from his seat. His face might have been chiseled out of the marble, so hard and set was his expression, while his eyes glowed with a baneful light. "Where are you going?" "Never mind," he answered, slinging his weapon over his shoulder, strode off the gorge and so away into the heart of the mountains, to the haunts of the wild beasts. Amongst them all were as none so fierce and dangerous as himself. The prediction of the Mormon was only too well fulfilled, whether it was the terrible death of her father or the effects of the hateful marriage into which she had been forced. Poor Lucy never held up her head again, pined away and died within a month. Her sottish husband, who had married her principally for the sake of John Ferrier's property, did not affect any great grief at his bereavement, but his other wives mourned after her, and sat up with her the night before the burial, as is Mormon custom. They were grouped round the bier in the early hours of the morning, when, to their inexpressible fear and astonishment, the door was flung open and a savage-looking, weather-beaten man in tattered garments strode into the room. Without a glance or a word to the coward women, he walked up to the white, silent figure which had once contained the pure soul of Lucy Ferrier. Stooping over her, he pressed his lips reverently to her cold forehead, and then, snatching up her hand, he took the wedding ring from her finger. "She shall not be buried in that," he cried with a fierce snarl, and before an alarm could be raised he sprang down the stairs and was gone. So strange and so brief was the episode that the watchers might have found it hard to believe it themselves or persuade other people of it, had it not been for the undeniable fact that the circlet of gold which marked her as having been the bride had disappeared. For some months Jefferson Hope lingered among the mountains, leading a strange, wild life, and nursing in his heart the fierce desires for vengeance which possessed him. Tales were told in the city of the weird figure which was seen prowling about in the suburbs, and which haunted the lonely mountain gorges. Once a bullet whistled through Staggerson's window and flattened itself on the wall within a foot of him. On another occasion, as Drebber passed under a cliff, a great boulder crashed down on him, and he only escaped a terrible death by throwing himself upon his face. Two young Mormons were not long for discovering the reason for these attempts on their lives, and led repeated expeditions into the mountains in hope of capturing or killing the enemy, but always without success. Then they adopted the precaution of never going out alone, or after nightfall, and having their houses guarded. After a time they were able to relax these measures, for nothing was either seen or heard of their opponent, and they had hoped time had cooled his vindictiveness. Far from doing so, it had, if anything, augmented it. The hunter's mind was of a hard, unyielding nature, and the predominant idea of revenge had taken such a complete possession of it that there was no room for any other emotion. He was, however, above all things, practical. He soon realized that even his iron constitution could not stand the incessant strain which he was putting upon it. Exposure and want of wholesome food were wearing him thin. If he died like a dog among the mountains, what was to become of his revenge then? And yet such a death was sure to overtake him if he persisted. He felt that was to play his enemy's game. So he reluctantly returned to the old Nevada mines, there to recruit his health and to amass enough money to allow him to pursue his object without preparation. His intention had been to be absent a year at the most, but a combination of unforeseen circumstances prevented his leaving the mines for nearly 5. At the end of that time, however, his memory of his wrongs and his craving for his revenge were quite as keen on that memorable night which he had stood by John Ferrier's grave. Disguised and under an assumed name, he returned to Salt Lake City, careless what became of his own life, as long as he obtained what he knew to be justice. There he found evil tidings awaiting him. There had been a schism among the chosen people a few months before, some of the younger members of the church having rebelled against the authority of the elders, and the result had been the secession of a certain number of the malcontents who had left Utah and become Gentiles. Among these had been Drebber and Staggerson, and no one knew whither they had gone. Rumor reported that Drebber had managed to convert a large part of his property into money, and that he had departed a wealthy man, while his companion, Staggerson, was comparatively poor. This was no clue at all, however, as to their whereabouts. Many a man, however vindictive, would have abandoned all the thought of revenge in the face of such a difficulty. But Jefferson Hope never faltered for a moment. With the small competence he possessed, eked out by such employment as he could pick up, he traveled from town to town through the United States in quest of his enemies. A year passed into year, his black hair turned grizzled, and still he wandered on, a human bloodhound, with his mind wholly upon the one object in which he had devoted his life. At last his perseverance was rewarded. It was but a glance of a face in a window, but that one glance told him that Cleveland and Ohio possessed the men who had been pursued of. He returned to his miserable lodgings with the plan of vengeance all arranged. It chanced, however, that Drebber, looking from his window, had recognized the vagrant in the street, and had read murder in his eyes. He hurried before a justice of the peace, accompanied by Staggerson, who had become his private secretary, and represented to him that they were in danger of their lives from the jealousy and hatred of an old rival. That evening, Jefferson Hope was taken into custody, and not being able to find sureties, was detained for some weeks. When at last he was liberated, it was only to find that Drebber's house was deserted, and that he and his secretary had departed for Europe. Again the Avenger had been foiled, and again his concentrated hatred urged him to continue the pursuit. Funds were wanting, however, and for some time he had to return to work, saving every dollar for his approaching journey. At last, having collected enough to keep life in him, he departed for Europe and tracked his enemies from city to city, working his way in any menial capacity but never overtaking the fugitives. When he reached St. Petersburg, they had departed for Paris. When he followed them there, he learned that they had just set off for Copenhagen. At the Danish capital, he was again a few days late, for they had journeyed on to London, where he at last succeeded in returning them to Earth. As to what occurred there, we cannot do better than quote the old hunter's own account, as duly recorded in Dr. Watson's journal, which we are already under such obligations. That's the end of chapter 5. We've got 2 chapters left. Now I get to go back into Watson's voice, because it's his journal. So, yeah. And congratulations for getting second. Okay. I'm not hearing wind. I'm not hearing thunder. That is a little concerning. I'm seeing wind, though. I'm going to take a quick look outside. I will be right back. All right, the street is flooded up to the sidewalk. uh, I can barely see the strip of land between the sidewalk and the road. Just means it's up over the curb and it's my yard. I'm sure the moat next to my house is probably full. I really need to finish that moat. Because everyone should have a moat by their house, right? Anyway. You want to open the windows up again yet? I may do that later. Okay. Again, we have 2 chapters left. We're going to do it tonight. I know it. We're going to finish this book. Then I'll go to the next one. Sherlock Holmes reading, I guess. Anyway. Chapter 6. A continuation of the Reminiscences of John Watson, M.D. Our prisoner's furious resistance did not apparently indicate any ferocity in his disposition towards ourselves. On finding himself powerless, he smiled in an affable manner, and expressed his hopes that he had not hurt any of us in the scuffle. "I guess you're going to take me to the police station," he remarked to Sherlock Holmes. "My cab's at the door, and if you'll loose my legs, I'll walk down to it. I'm not so light to lift as I used to be." Gregson and Lestrade exchanged glances, as if they thought this proposition was a rather bold one. But Holmes at once took the prisoner at his word and loosened the towel which he had bound around his ankles. He rose and stretched his legs, as though to assure himself that they were once free. I remember that I thought to myself, as I eyed him, that I had seldom seen a more powerfully built man, and his dark, sunburned face bore an expression of determination and energy which was as formidable as his personal strength. "If there's a vacant place for the chief of the police, I reckon you're the man for it," he said, gazing at the undisguised admiration of my fellow lodger. "The way you kept my trail was as a caution." "You had better come with me," said Holmes to the two detectives. "I can drive you," said Lestrade. "Good. And Gregson, can you come inside with me? You too, Doctor. You have taken an interest in this case, and may as well stick to us." I assented gladly, as we all descended together. Our prisoner made no attempt at escape, but stepped calmly into the cab which had been his, and we followed him. Lestrade mounted the box and whipped up the horse, and brought us in a very short time to the destination. We were ushered into a small chamber where the police inspector noted down our prisoner's name and the names of the men with whom the murder had been charged. The official was a white-faced, unemotional man, who had seen his duties in a dull, mechanical way. "The prisoner will be put before the magistrates in the court of the week," he said. "In the meantime, Mr. Jefferson Hope, have you anything that you wish to say? I must warn you that your words will be taken down and may be used against you." "I've got a good deal to say," our prisoner said slowly. "I want to tell you gentlemen all about it." "Hadn't you better reserve that for your trial?" asked the inspector. "I may never be tried," he answered. "You needn't look startled. It isn't suicide I'm thinking of. Are you a doctor?" He turned his fierce dark eyes to me and asked his last question. "Yes, I am," I answered. "Then put your hand here," he said with a smile, motioning to his manacled wrists toward his chest. I did so, and became at once conscious of an extraordinary throbbing and commotion which was going on inside. The walls of his chest seemed to thrill and quiver as a frail building would do inside of some powerful engine was at work. In the silence of the room I could hear a dull humming and buzzing noise which proceeded from the same source. "Why," I cried, "you have an aortic aneurysm!" "That's what they call it," he said placidly. "I went to the doctor's last week about it, and he told me it was bound to burst before many days passed. And it's been getting worse for years. I got it from overexposure and underfeeding among the Salt Lake Mountains. I've done my work now, and all I don't care how soon I go. I should like to leave an account of my business behind me. I don't want to be remembered as a common cutthroat." The inspector and the two detectives had a hurried discussion to the advisability of allowing him to tell his story. "Do you consider, Doctor, that there is an imminent danger?" the former asked. "Oh, certainly there is," I answered. "In that case, it is clearly our duty, in the interests of justice, to take a statement," said the inspector. "You are at liberty, sir, to give your account, which I again warn you will be taken down." "I'll sit down and leave you in peace." said the prisoner, suiting every action to the word. "This engine of mine makes me easily tired, and the tussle we had half an hour ago was not mended matters. I'm on the brink of the grave, and am not likely to lie to you. Every word I say will be the absolute truth, and how you use it is a matter of no consequence to me." With these words, Jefferson Hope leaned back in a chair and began the following remarkable statement. He spoke in a calm and methodical manner, although the events which he narrated were commonplace enough. I can vouch for the accuracy of the subjoined account, for I have had access to Lestrade's notebook, in which the prisoner's words were taken down exactly as they were uttered. "It don't matter much why you hated these men," he said. "It's enough that they were guilty of the death of two human beings, a father and a daughter, and that they had, therefore, forfeited their own lives. After a lapse of time that had passed since their crime, it was impossible for me to secure a conviction against them in any court. I knew of their guilt, though, and I determined that I should be the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one. You'd have done the same if you had been any manhood in you, if you had any been in my place. That girl I spoke of was to be married to me 20 years ago. She was forced into marrying that same Drebber, and broke her heart over it. I took the marriage ring from her dead finger, and I vowed that his dying eyes should rest upon that very ring, and that his last thoughts should be of the crime for which he is punished. I have carried it about me, and have followed him and his accomplice over 2 continents until I caught them. They thought to tire me out, but they could not do it. If I die tomorrow, as it is likely enough, I die knowing that my work in this world is done, and well done. They have perished, and by my hand. There's nothing left for me to hope for, or to desire. They were rich, and I was poor, so that is no easy matter for me to follow them. When I got to London, my pocket was about empty, and I found that I must turn my hand into something for a living. Driving and riding are all natural to me as walking, so I applied at the cab owner's office and got soon employment. I was to bring a certain sum a week to the owner, and whatever was left over, that I might keep for myself. There was seldom much over, but I managed to scrape along somehow. The hardest job was to learn my way about, for I reckon that of all the mazes that were ever contrived, this city is among the most confusing. I had a map beside me, though, and once I got spotted the principal hotels and stations, I got on pretty well. It was some time before I found out where the 2 gentlemen were living, but I inquired and inquired until I at last dropped across them. They were at a boarding house in Camberwell, over on the other side of the river. When once I found them out, I knew that I had them at my mercy. I had grown my beard, and there was no chance of their recognizing me. I would dog them and follow them until I saw my opportunity, and I was determined that they should not escape me again. They were very near doing it, for all that. Go where they would about London, I always at their heels. Sometimes I followed them on my cab, and sometimes on foot, but the former was the best, for then they could not get away from me. It was only early in the morning or late at night that I could earn anything, so that I began to get behindhand with my employer. I did not mind that, however, as long as I could lay my hand upon the men I wanted. They were very cunning, though. They must have thought that there was some chance of their being followed, for they would never go out alone, and never after nightfall. During 2 weeks I drove behind them every day, and never once saw them separate. Drebber himself was drunk half the time, but Strangerson was not to be caught napping. I watched them late and early, but never saw the ghost of a chance. But I was not discouraged for anything. Something told me that the hour was almost come. My only fear was that this thing in my chest might burst a little too soon and leave my work undone. At last, one evening, I was driving up and down Torquay Terrace, as the street was called when they boarded, when I saw a cab drive up to their door. Presently, some luggage was brought out, and after a time, Drebber and Stegerson followed it and drove off. I whipped up my horse and kept them within sight, feeling very ill at ease, for I feared that they were going to shift their quarters. At Euston Station they got out, and I left a boy to hold my horse and followed them on the platform. I heard them ask for a Liverpool train, and the guard answered that one of them had just gone. and there would not yet be another for some hours. Staggerson seemed to put out at that, but Drebber was rather pleased than otherwise, so I got close to them in the bustle and I could hear every word that passed between them. Drebber said that he had a little business of his own to do, and that if the other would wait for him, he would soon rejoin him. His companion remonstrated with him and reminded him that they were resolved to stay together. Drebber answered that matter with a delicate one, and he must go alone. I could not catch what Staggerson was said to do, but the other burst out swearing and reminded him that he was nothing more than his paid servant, and that he must not presume to dictate to him. On that, the secretary gave it up as a bad job and simply bargained with him that if he missed the last train, he would rejoin him at Holliday's private hotel, to which Drebin answered that he would be back on the platform before 11, and made his way out of the station. The moment for which I had waited was so at hand and had long at last come. I had my enemies within my power. Together they could protect each other, but singly they were at my mercy. I did not act, however, with undue precipitation. My plans were already formed. There was no satisfaction in vengeance unless the offender has time to realize who it was that strikes him, and why retribution was come upon him. I had my plans arranged by which I should have the opportunity of making the man who had wronged me understand that his old sin had found him. It chanced that some days before, a gentleman who had been engaged in looking over some houses in Brixton Road had dropped the key of one of them in my carriage. It was claimed that same evening and returned. But in the interval I had taken a molding of it and had a duplicate constructed. By means of this, I had access to at least one spot in the great city I could rely upon being free from interruption. How to get Drebber to that house was a difficult problem which I now had to solve. He walked down the road and went into one of the liquor shops, staying for nearly half an hour in the last of them. When he came out, he staggered in his walk and was evidently pretty well on. There was a hansom just in front of me, and he hailed it. I followed so close that the nose of the horse was within a yard of his driver the whole way. We rattled across Waterloo Bridge and through miles of streets until, to my astonishment, we found ourselves back at the terrace in which he had boarded. I could not imagine what his intention was in returning there, but I went in and pulled my cab 100 yards or so from the house. He entered it, and his hansom drove away. "Give me a glass of water, if you please. My mouth is getting cut after talking." I handed him the glass, and he drank it down. "That's better," he said. Well, I waited for a quarter of an hour or more, when suddenly there came a noise like people struggling inside the house. Next moment the door was flung open and two men appeared, one of whom was Drebber, and the other was a young man whom I had never seen before. This fellow had Drebber by the collar, and when they came to the head of the steps he gave him a shove and a kick that sent him halfway across the road. "You hound!" he cried, shaking his stick at him. "I'll teach you to insult an honest girl." He was so hot that I think he would have thrashed Drebber with his cudgel, only that the cur staggered away down the road as fast as his legs would carry him. He ran as far as the corner, and then seeing my cab, he hailed me and jumped in. "Drive me to Holiday's private hotel," he said. When I had him fairly inside my cab, my heart jumped with joy that I feared lest at his last moment an aneurysm might go wrong. I drove along slowly, weighing in my own mind what was best to do. I might take him right out of the country, and there in some deserted lane have his last interview with him. I had almost decided upon this when he solved the problem for me. The craze of his drink had seized him again, and he ordered me to pull outside the gin palace. He went in, leaving word that I should wait for him. There he remained until closing time, and when he came out he was so far gone that I knew the game was in my own hands. Don't imagine that I intended to kill him in cold blood. It would only have been a rigid justice if I had done so. But I could not bring myself to do it. I had long determined that he should have a show of his life if he chose to take advantage of it. Among the many billets which I had filled in America during my wandering life, I was once a janitor and sweeper out of a laboratory in New York College.
One day the professor was lecturing on poisons, and he showed which students with some alkali, as he called it, and which some had extracted from South American arrow poison, and which was so powerful that the least grain meant instant death. I spotted the bottle which was the preparation kept, and when they were all gone, I helped myself to a little of it. I was a fairly good dispenser, so I worked the alkaloid into a small, soluble pill, and each pill I put in the box of a similar pill made without the poison. I determined at that time when I had the chance my gentlemen should each have a draw out of one of these little boxes, while I ate the pill that remained. It would be quite as deadly and a good deal less noisy than firing across a handkerchief. From that day I had always the pill boxes about with me, and the time had now come when I was to use them. It was nearer 1 than 12 when a wild, bleak night blowing hard and raining in torrents. Dismal as it was outside, I was glad within, so glad that I could have shouted out of pure exultation. If any of you gentlemen have ever pined for a thing and longed for it for 20 years long, and then suddenly found it within your reach, you would understand my feelings. I lit a cigar and puffed at it steadily to calm my nerves. My hand was trembling, and temple was throbbing with excitement. As I drove, I could see old John Ferrier and sweet Lucy looking at me in the darkness and smiling at me, just as plain as I see all you in this room. All the way they were ahead of me, one on each side of the horse, till I pulled up at the house at Brixton Road. There was not a soul to be seen, nor a sound to be heard, except the dripping of the rain. When I looked in at the window, I found Drebber all huddled together in a drunken sleep. I shook him by the arm. "It's time to get out," I said. "All right, cabby," he said. I suppose he thought we had come to the hotel that he had mentioned, and he got out without another word and followed me down the garden. I had to walk beside him to keep him steady, for he was a little top-heavy. When we came to the door, I opened it and led him to the front room. I give my word that all that way the father and the daughter were walking in front of us. "It's infernal dark," he said, stamping about. "I'll soon have a light," I said, striking a match and putting it to the wax candle which I had brought with me. "Now, knock Drebber," I continued, turning to him and holding the light to my own face. "Who am I?" He gazed at me with bleary, drunken eyes for a moment, and then I saw the horror spring up in him and convulse his whole features. It showed me that he knew me. He staggered back with a livid face, and I saw the perspiration break out upon his brow, while his teeth clattered in his head. At the sight, I leaned back against the door and laughed loud and long. I'd always known that vengeance would be sweet, but I'd never hoped for this contentment of soul which was now possessing me. "You dog," I said, "I've hunted you from Salt Lake to St. Petersburg, and you've always escaped me. Now at last your wanderings have come to an end, for either you or I shall never see tomorrow's sunrise." He shrunk still farther away as I spoke, and I could see on his face that he had thought I was mad. So I was for the time. The pulses in my temples beat like sledgehammers, and I believe I could have had a fit of some sort if the blood had not been gushed out of my nose and relieving me. "What do you think of Lucy Ferrier now?" I cried, locking the door and shaking the key in his face. "Punishment has been slow in coming, but if it has overtaken you at last—" I saw his coward lips tremble when I spoke. He would have begged for his life, but he knew well that it was useless. "Would you murder me?" he stammered. "There is no murder," I answered. "Who talks of murdering a mad dog? What mercy had you upon my poor darling when you dragged her from her slaughtered father and bore her away on your accursed and shameless harem?" "I was not the one who killed her father," he cried. "But it was you who broke her innocent heart," I shrieked, thrusting the box before him. "Let the high God judge between us. Choose and eat. There's death in one and life in the other. I shall take what you leave. Let us see if there is injustice on this earth, or if we are ruled by chance." He cowered away with wild cries for mercy and prayers, but I drew my knife and held it to his throat until he had obeyed me. Then I swallowed the other one, and we stood facing one another in silence for a minute or more, waiting to see which was to live and which was to die. Shall I ever forget the look which came over his face when the first warning's pain told him that the poison was in his system? I laughed when I saw it, and I held Lucy's marriage ring in front of his eyes. It was but for a moment, for the action was rapid. A spasm of pain contorted his features. He threw out his hands in front of him and staggered, and then, with a hoarse cry, fell heavily upon the floor. I turned him over with my foot and placed my hand on his heart. There was no movement. He was dead. The blood had been streaming from my nose, but I had taken no notice of it. I don't know what it is to put that into my head to write upon the wall with it. Perhaps it was some mischievous idea of setting the police upon a wrong track, for I felt light-hearted and cheerful. I remembered a German being found in New York with the Rachi written above him, and was argued at the time of the newspapers that the secret societies must have done it. I guess that what puzzled the New Yorkers would puzzle the Londoners, so I dipped my finger in my own blood and printed it on the convenient place in the wall. Then I walked down to my cab and found that there was nobody about, and what the night was still very wild. I had driven some distance when I put my hand in my pocket, in which I had usually kept my Lucy's ring, and found that it was not there. I was thunderstruck at this, for it was my only memento that I had of her. Thinking that I might have dropped it when I stooped over Drebber's body, I drove back, and leaving my cab in the side street, I went boldly up to the house, for I was ready to dare anything and to lose the ring. When I arrived there, I walked right into the arms of a police officer who was coming out, and had only managed to disarm the suspicions by pretending to be a hopeless drunk. That was how Enoch Drebber came to his end. All I had to do then was to find Staggerson, and so pay off John Ferrier's debt. I knew that he was staying at the Holiday's private hotel, and I hung about it all day, but he never came out. I fancied that he suspected something of Drebber's failed to put in appearance. He was cunning, that Staggerson, and always on guard. If he thought he could keep me off from staying indoors, he was very much mistaken. I soon found out which was the window of his bedroom, and early in the next morning I took advantage of some ladders which were lying on the lane behind the hotel, so I made my way up into his room in the gray of the dawn. I woke him up and told him that the hour had come when he was to answer for the life that he had taken so long ago. I described Drebber's death to him, and gave him a chance the same choice of the poison pills. Instead of grasping at the chance of safety which that offered him, he sprang from his bed and flew at my throat. In self-defense, I stabbed him to the heart. I would have been the same in any case, for Providence would never have allowed his guilty hand to pick out anything but the poison. I have little more to say, that's as well, for I am about done up. I went on cabbing it for a day or so, intending to keep it until I could save enough to take me back to America. I was standing in the yard when the ragged youngsters asked if there was a cabby there called Jefferson Hope, and said that his cab was wanted by a gentleman at 221B Baker Street. I went round suspecting no harm, and the next thing I knew, this young man here had the bracelets on my wrists, and was neatly shackled as ever I saw in my life. That's the whole story, my gentlemen. You may consider me to be a murderer, but I hold that I am such an officer of justice as you are. So thrilling had the man's narrative been that his manager was so impressive that we had sat silent and absorbed. Even the professional detectives, blasé as they were in every detail of crime, appeared to be keenly interested in this man's story. When he had finished, we sat for some minutes in the stillness, which was only broken by the scratching of Lestrade's pencil as he gave the finishing touches to his shorthand account. "There is only one point on which I would like a little more information," Sherlock Holmes said at last. "Who was your accomplice? Who came for the ring which I had advertised?" The prisoner winked at my friend jocosely. "I can tell my own secrets," he said, "but I don't want to get other people into trouble. I saw your advertisement and thought it might be a plant, or might be the ring which I wanted. My friend volunteered to go and see. I think you'll own he did it smartly. No doubt of that, said Holmes heartily. Now, gentlemen, the inspector remarked gravely, the forms of the law must be completed with. On Thursday, the prisoner will be brought before the magistrates, and your attendance will be required. Until then, I will be responsible for him. He rang a bell as he spoke, and Jefferson Hope was led off by a couple of wanderers, while my friend and I made our way back to the station and took a cab back to Baker Street. Ouch. Always good to hear someone confessing. There's only one chapter left, and it's called Conclusion. And with that, we will see if anyone's up to raid. Or if anyone would like to suggest a raid, I do have that option. Just so you know. But we'll probably chat a little after I'm finished with this. So. Oh. Hydrate myself a little quick. Okay. Try to ignore the moth. Okay. Chapter 7. The Conclusion. We had all been warned to appear before the magistrate on the Thursday. But when the Thursday came, there was no occasion for our testimony. A higher judge had taken the matter in hand, and Jefferson Hope had been summoned before a tribunal where strict justice would be meted out to him. On the very night of his capture, the aneurysm burst, and he was found in the morning stretched upon the floor of his cell, with a placid smile upon his face, as though he had been able in his dying moments to look back upon a useful life, and on work well done. Gregson Lestrade will be wild about his death, Holmes remarked, as we chatted about it over the next morning. Where will their grand advertisement be now? I don't see that they had very much to do with this capture, I answered. What you do in this world is no matter of consequence, returned my companion bitterly. The question is, what can you make people believe that you have done? Never mind, he continued more brightly after a pause. I would have not missed the investigation for anything. There has been no better case within my recollection. Simple as it was, there were several most instructive points about it. Simple, I ejaculated. Well, really, it was hardly described as otherwise, said Sherlock Holmes, smiling at my surprise. The proof of it is intrinsic simplicity, that without any help save for a few very ordinary deductions, I was able to lay my hand upon the criminal within 3 days. That is true, said I. I have already explained to you that what is out of the common is usually a guide rather than a hindrance. In solving a problem of this sort, the grand thing is to be able to reason backwards. That is a very useful accomplishment and a very easy one, but people do not practice it much. In the everyday affairs of life it is more useful to reason forwards, and so the other comes to be neglected. There are 50 who can reason synthetically for one who can reason analytically. I confess, said I, that I do not quite follow you. I hardly expected that you would. Let me see if I can make it clearer. Most people, if you describe a train of events to them, will tell you what the results would be. They can put those events together in their minds and argue from them that someone will come to pass. There are few people, however, who, if you told them as a result, would be able to evolve from their own inner consciousness what the steps were in which to lead up to that result. This power is what I mean when I talk of reasoning backwards, or analytically. I understand, said I. Now, this was a case in which you were given the result and had to find everything else for yourself. Now let me endeavor to show you the different steps in my reasoning. To begin at the beginning, I approached the house, as you know, on foot, and with my mind entirely free from all impressions. I naturally gave my examining of the roadway, and there, I have already explained to you, I saw clearly the marks of a cab, which I ascertained by inquiry must have been there during the night. I satisfied myself that it was a cab and not a private carriage by the narrow gauge of the wheels. An ordinary London growler is considerably less wide than a gentleman's brougham. This was the first point gained. I then walked slowly down the garden path, which happened to be composed of clay soil, particularly suitable for taking impressions. No doubt it appeared to you to be the merely trampling of slush, but to my trained eyes every mark upon its surface had a meaning. There is no branch of detective science in which it is so important and so much neglected as the art of tracing footsteps. Happily, I have always laid great stress upon it, and much practice has made it second nature to me. I saw the heavy footmarks of the constables, but I also saw the track of two men who were first passing through the garden. It was easy to tell that they had been there before the others. Placing in places their marks had been entirely obliterated by the others coming upon them. In this way my second link was formed, which told me that the nocturnal visitors were two in number, one remarkable for his height, as I calculated from the length of his stride, and the other fashionably dressed, to judge from the small and elegant impressions left by his boots. On entering the house, this last inference was confirmed. My well-booted man lay before me. The tall one, then, had done the murder, if murder there was. There was no wound upon my dead man's person, but the agitated expression on his face assured me that he had foreseen his fate before it had come upon him. Men who die from heart disease or natural causes never have any chance to exhibit agitation upon their expressions. Having stiffened the dead man's lips, I detected a slightly sour smell, and I came to the conclusion that he had been poisoned forced upon him. Again, I argued that it had been forced upon him from the hatred and fear expression upon his face. By the method of exclusion, I had arrived at the result, for no other hypothesis would meet the facts. Do not imagine that it was a very unheard of idea. The forcible administration of poison is by no means a new thing in criminal annals. The cases of Dolsky in Odessa, or Latour in Montpellier, will occur at once to any toxicologist. And now came my greatest question, and to the reason why. Robbery had not taken the object of the murder, for nothing was taken. Was it politics, then, or was it a woman? That was the question which confronted me. I was inclined to learn the latter supposition. Political assassins are only too glad to do their work and to fly. This murder had, on the contrary, been done most deliberately, and the perpetrator had left his tracks all over the room, showing that he had been there all the time. It must have been a private wrong, and not a political one, which called for such methodical revenge. Which the inscription had discovered upon the wall, I was more inclined than ever to my opinion. The thing was too evidently a blind. When the ring was found, however, it settled the question. Clearly the murderer had used it to remind the victim of some dead or absent woman. It was at this point that I asked Gregson whether he had inquired in his telegram to Cleveland as to the particular point in Mr. Drebber's former career. He answered, you remember, in the negative. Then I proceeded to make a careful examination of the room, which confirmed me in my opinion that the murderer's height, and furnished me with one additional details as to the Trichinopoly cigar and the length of his nails. I had already come to the conclusion, since there were no signs of a struggle, that the blood which covered the floor had burst from the murderer's nose in his excitement. I could perceive that the track of blood coincided with the track of his feet. It was seldom that any man, unless he is very blood-filled, break out in this way through emotion, so I hazarded the opinion that the criminal was probably a robust and ruddy-faced man. Events proved that I had judged correctly. Having left the house, I proceeded to do what Gregson had neglected. I telegraphed to the head of the police at Cleveland, limiting my inquiry to the circumstances connected with the marriage of Enoch Drebber. The answer was conclusive. It told me that Drebber had already applied for the protection of the law against an old rival in love, named Jefferson Hope, and that the same Hope was present in Europe. I now knew that I held the clue to the mystery at hand, and all that remained was to secure the murderer. I had already determined in my own mind that the man who had walked into the house of Drebber was none other than the man who had driven the cab. The marks on the road showed me that the horse had wandered on in a way which would have been impossible had there been anyone in charge of it. Then could the driver be unless he were inside the house? Again, it was absurd to suppose that any sane man would carry out a deliberate crime under the very eyes, as it were, of a third person, who was sure to betray him. Lastly, supposing one man wished to dog another through London, what better means could be adopted than to turn cab driver? All these considerations led me to the irresistible conclusion that Jefferson Hope was to be found among the Jarvies of the metropolis. If he had been one, that was no reason to believe that he had ceased to be one. On the contrary, from his point of view, any sudden change would be likely to draw attention to himself. He would probably, for the time at least, continue to perform his duties. There was no reason to suppose that he was going under an assumed name. Why should he change his name in a country where no one knew his original one? I therefore organized my street Arab detective corps to send out them systematically to every cab proprietor in London until they ferreted out a man that I wanted. How well they succeeded, and how quickly I took advantage of it, are still fresh in your recollection. The murder of Staggerson was an incident which was entirely unexpected, but which could hardly be in any case prevented. Through it, as you know, I came into possession of these pills, the existence of which I had already surmised. You see, the whole thing in a chain of logical sequences, without a break or flaw. "It is wonderful," I cried. "Your merit should be publicly recognized. You should publish an account of this case. If you won't, I will for you." "You may do what you like, Doctor," he answered. "See here." He continued, handing me a paper over to me. "Look at this." It was the echo for the day, and the paragraph to which he pointed was devoted to the case in question. "The public," it said, "have lost a sensational treat through the sudden death of a man like Hope, who was suspected of murder of Mr. Enoch Drebber and of Mr. Joseph Staggerson. The details on the case will probably never be known now, though we are informed upon good authority that the crime was a result of an old standing and romantic feud, in which love and Mormonism bore a part. It seems that both the victims belonged, in their younger days, to the Latter-day Saints, and Hope, the deceased prisoner, hails also from Salt Lake City. If the case had no other effect, it at least brings out the most striking manner of efficiency of our detective police force, and will serve as a lesson to all foreigners that they will do wisely to settle their feuds at home, and not to carry them on British soil. It is an open secret that the credit of the smart capture belongs entirely to the well-known Scotland Yard officials, Messrs. Lestrade and Gregson. The man was apprehended, it seems, in the rooms of a certain Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was himself, as an amateur, shown some talent in the detective line, and who, with such instructors, may hope in time to attain some degree of their skill. It is expected that a testimonial of some sort will be presented to the two officers and a fitting recognition of their services. "Didn't I tell you whom we have started?" cried Sherlock Holmes with a laugh. "That's the result of our study in Scarlet, to get them a testimonial." "Never mind," I answered. "I have all the facts in my journal, and the public shall know them. In the meantime, you must make yourself contented with the consciousness of success, like the Roman miser. Populus me syllabat, me et mihi plaudo, ips domi simulac nomos contemplor enarca." My Latin pronunciation is very rough. Well, thus ends the study in Scarlet. What is a masquerade? Masquerade. Alright, I hope you all enjoyed the end of Study in Scarlet. I will drag out the next book because I do have them. If I don't have the individual book, I've got the collections. So,
But for now, let's see who might be on. I think Sophia's still going. Yep, Sophia's still going. She is reading TikTok of Arts. Not sure how much more she has of it though. Let me drop some eaves and check. Okay, yeah, let's read the wonderful Sophia. So, I got my raid messages for followers. Got my raid message for subscriber people. If you don't have the emote, that's only a couple hundred points. If you follow me, you got more than enough for it by now, I'm sure. So, let us raid her before she runs away. Oh no, she's about to raid. Okay, let's get her before she jumps out. Have a good evening. I hope you enjoyed the story, and yeah, I'm gonna go see what's going on with the Storm. So, ciao for now.